break right now, Norma Jean, and when we come back, the police force before becoming an expensive Beverly Hills call girl. Norma Jean, we were beginning to delve into some of your past, which is part of your history. You were going all over the country talking about your experiences, not only in the police force, but the piece you're writing about the corruption that, at least in your view, takes place on the police force, and also your experiences as a call girl. You were subsequently arrested, right, for this crime of being...
Pandering is the crime of encouraging another person by scheme, device, or promise to commit an act of prostitution. And as defined, prostitution is an act of sex for money or other consideration, which means that anyone who has sex with someone else for any reason can fall under the category of other consideration, and so that makes a lot of people prostitutes.
How much time did you...
Sentencing for 90 days to send me to state prison to have a psychiatric study to see if I'm dangerous to the community. And so I went the day before Thanksgiving, and I was there for 50 days in solitary and isolation. And the study took 3.5 hours, but I was there for 50 days because the judge wanted me to have a taste of prison.
So, tell us, how do you feel about that?
I'm very angry. They took away my freedom for 50 days. This is the United States of America. This isn't Russia, where we put people in prison as political prisoners because they say something we don't like. And I feel very angry because my crime was that I dared to make a statement against the police department. In fact, the victim, when she got on the stand, this woman that set me up, a 50-year-old, 6'2", 230-pound woman who fantasized about being a call girl, and I went out and found her a client, and I paid him to see her. And she admitted on the stand that the reason she did this was because she wanted to prevent me from writing an expose on Los Angeles police, which is, you know, an admission that they're violating my First Amendment rights. But she continued to say, well, she tried to entice me into this life of prostitution, and it was like, there's 3 hours of tape conversations between myself and this woman, and it was very clear that this was strictly the fulfillment of her fantasy and not a long-term career opportunity.
Did you resume your career when you left prison?
When I left prison, I'm on probation right now for 3 years, and if I continue to act as a prostitute, I will go back to prison for 3 years.
So you have taken up some other erotic...
Some other interest, yes.
Tell me about that. Erotic doll business.
Right. Well, I've able, and it's really to teach women to understand their men's fantasies and even to understand their own, because a lot of women are too afraid to try anything beyond the normal missionary positions.
Why is it that people are saying that you now, Norma Jean, are an erotic activist? What is that all about?
Well, I didn't know they were saying that, but that's interesting. I am an activist for the decriminalization of prostitution, and I feel that each person should have self-determination with their body. I believe that your body belongs to yourself and not to the United States government, not to the government of California. I believe that you should be able to determine what you should do with that body, and if you should be able to take money for an act of sex when you could have the sex anyway. And that's really what I'm out trying to do.
You know, I think prostitution has been good.
Especially those who think that they have something to lose, or they could stand to lose something because of your honesty, like the police department.
That's true. That's true. I find that honesty and rationality often offend people because you're supposed to be, if you're a prostitute, you're supposed to say, oh, I really don't like the job. I do it only for the money. I admit I like the money. You know, when I was working, I had a great...
It is a mandatory prison term. Prostitution and pandering or pimping are the only mandatory sentencing laws in California. In other words, for rape or robbery or anything else, if you're convicted, it's not mandatory that you go to jail.
How long?
But for prostitution, it is.
How long did you go?
And I was sent to prison for 50 days to be studied. I was sent there. What the judge did is, instead of sentencing me as he was supposed to, he said, I will delay sentencing until you have been in prison for 50 days to see whether or not the kind of crime you've committed is harmful to society. And so the study itself took 3.5 hours, but I was in prison in isolation. And
we asked you a question to start our program, and we want you to vote on it. Should prostitution be legalized? And the phone number that we want to give you is 415-478-VOTE. Now let's see how you're voting so far. Yeses, 71%. No, 29%. So it's holding in there about...
As I said before, it has always been with us and probably always will be. What would you like to see happen with it?
Well, I'd like to see the laws against the prostitution, against the being a management, which is called pandering. I'd like to see those laws discontinued. I won't say legalized. I mean decriminalized, because legalized means maybe the government perhaps sanctions what I do. And I don't want them to sanction what I do any more than, I want anyone else to sanction it. I just want them to let me live my life and do what I do.
Or, as you say, in the higher levels of prostitution. You can drive around this town and you see people working street corners. And some people are offended. It kind of breaks my heart. To me, it seems very sad and pathetic. Don't you have the same reaction?
For the women on the street, yes, I do. I don't believe prostitution belongs out on the street. It belongs either in a licensed brothel where a woman can go and she is protected by security, just like a woman is protected in a restaurant if she's working as a waitress, where she can be safe, where if it is decriminalized, if there is a problem with a client who is unruly, they can call the police and immediately remove that man from the premise. I don't believe it belongs on the street simply because there are people who object to what I do, and they should not have to be subjected to it.
And of course, and obviously there are people who object to what you do, whether it's on the street or it's in the high-class call girl operation. Anyway, we thank you for coming by and talking to us. Norma,
Is that there is a basic corruption in most vice departments, police vice departments?
I would say that what happens is that when you ask mortal beings to enforce so-called moral laws upon other human beings, the tendency is there that because these are human beings, the tendency is for them to do one of two things. They either are extremely diligent in enforcing these laws, or else they say, hey, you know something, I've had sex with women for other considerations, so I don't think that's so bad, and they will take money to look the other way, or they'll even, in some cases, we have a lot of cops who have, had sex with the prostitute in order for him to leave her alone. And I consider this extortion, whatever you want to call it, it's extortion. They also get information out of the prostitutes. The prostitutes are a great source of information for the police officers and the community.
We have Jan in the audience.
Pat, we've been sitting here listening to Norma Jean.
I think so far.
Well, I think she has some very good points. Do you think prostitution should be legalized? Yes, I do. You do? Why? Well, for many of the reasons that she is bringing out, I think that it is something that is a matter of choice, and as she has said, this is a matter of choice with her. I think also that there are people who do find it very threatening to have a long-term relationship or any sort of a relationship in which they have a responsibility. And I think that this is, shall we say, a way of getting around a human need, which apparently should be, I feel, legalized. Are you married? Yes. Yeah.
Very supportive, including my mother, and she was the one that I was really the most worried about, that she... To me, it was immoral, because I would have to look the other way continuously. I mean, I had
What did you see? Let me back up a bit. You say that you saw a lot of things there. What, for example?
Okay, well, let's see. The Hollywood division, which is where I worked, the cops had a burglary ring going. The cops were going out, and at night time, they were... let's say they'd go by an audio-video place, and they would throw a stone, set off the alarm, go in, fill up their police car, the back of their police car with audio-video equipment.
Now, surely this is not all the police officers.
No, it's not all of them, but what happened is that so many different things. There was a murder for hire ring one of the cops was running. Another cop was running a brothel. It's all public record. And some of the cops were having sex with underage Explorer Scouts, and these are just the
Underage Explorer Scouts?
Yes. 13, 14-year-olds. I mean, it just was, it was incredible what was going on. And the thing about it was is that not all cops were involved, but if you dared to say anything about it, you were a troublemaker, not them.
But not everybody who saw it left what they were doing and became...
A lot of them did leave. In fact...
But not to become what you were.
No, of course not. But, I mean, not all of them had the skills to become a call girl.
Well, I asked you about that, too. Let's see. But I mean... What do they say about all of this?
Well, the cops that are honest, they think that it's great. Okay, because I run into them all the time, and they say, go for it, Norma Jean.
Most of the cops had nothing against prostitution. I mean, when I was on the police department, I was offered money to have sex, with a captain for a going-away present. Now, that's prostitution.
Well, why you? Or did they go up to all the women?
There's a lot of, not all the women, but certainly young women that were on the police departments that were,
Look
cute
good, yeah.
Right, and the captains and so on and so forth would say, hey, I would like to have this one or that one. And, this particular captain wanted me for a going-away present, and so the other guy said, hey, we'll chip in and we'll pay for this. Well, that's prostitution. That's just what I do now and got arrested for. And, here the cops are actually, encouraging it by offering
But you realize there's so many people out here, especially, I guess, women who are watching the program who would say, I just don't see that big jump.
Let's talk about the world's oldest profession today. Should it be illegalized, or should it be legalized, rather? It is illegal right now. Of course, it still flourishes. Should we legalize it? That's an interesting question.
What profession is that?
It's called, what's a nice way of saying prostitution? I guess there's no other, that's the best way of putting it. In fact, we're going to ask you, what is it? Sex work. I have a feeling someone in the audience perhaps has some, well, never mind. We'll get to her a little bit later on, perhaps, all right? We would like to find out exactly whether or not you think prostitution should be legalized. So that's our people poll question today. If you think it should be, give us a call, 415-478-VOTE, and we'll keep you posted throughout the program exactly how you're voting, okay?
Okay.
Let's bring folks up to date now on that people poll question we asked you about 10 minutes ago. Should prostitution be legalized? And I tell you what, when you see these percentages, and when you know how many people have called up, we've had a lot of them. And let's take a look at the percentages right now. So far, it says 78% believe that prostitution should be legalized. 22% say no. So again, we'll keep you posted throughout the program. Again, the second half of the program, we're going to...
She became a prostitute after 10 years as a traffic officer, but she says her profession as a prostitute has higher morals than the police department does.
I saw so many things happen. I saw one blatant, breaking of the law of one of my former supervisors. This is something that's current because it's on the news now. She had been driving her car with an out-of-state registered license plate in Oregon for 10 years that I knew her. When I first came on the police department, she told me how to do it. She told me how to get my car registered in another state so I wouldn't have to pay the California registration. Now, this is breaking the law, and she's giving tickets for it. That's a small, petty corruption. But there's so many other bigger corruptions, so many other things that the police department tries to hide. For instance, when a few years back they had a big bus of these older folks from the Fairfax area for having penny ante poker games. And the captain at that time got on TV and justified his actions by saying these older people have to set an example to the community. They're gambling and they're et cetera, et cetera. And the very next day, this very same captain was up at Griffith Park at a steak fry playing poker for big money with the rest of the cops that had busted these people. And the hypocrisy of the whole thing, I don't believe prostitution is wrong. I don't believe it's anybody's business what I do in my bedroom. It's the only law in the world where both elements of the alleged crime are both legal by themselves. Having sex with anyone I want, that's perfectly legal. Taking money, if someone wants to give me money, that's perfectly legal. But if they put them together, I'm a criminal. And how can this be?
You wrote a book.
I have an awful lot to say about the hypocrisy on the police department, the way they treat prostitutes, the way they treat criminals in general, but prostitutes whose only crime is that they take money for sex. The things that they do to these women, the games that are played, they have this what's called the hooker run, where they have all this was before they cleaned up the streets. They have all the street prostitutes line up on one corner, make them take off their spike heels and run to the next block. Last one over is the one to go to prison, It's just incredible, the games they play with these women.
Justice for the working girl! Justice for the working girl!
When the hookers left, along with them went the pimps, the muggers that would mug the johns, pilfer their cars, etc. So the crime went along with the girls.
Prostitution, the very issue, is controversial. Some say, yes, it should be legalized, and that would eliminate street prostitutes, would eliminate crime. Others say no, deterioration of morals and community standards. We're talking about the legalization of prostitution this morning. I want your opinion as well. Let me give you a couple of numbers. We'd like, by the end of the show, to have a Vodafone result. If you think prostitution should be legalized, if you want yes, 766-8820. If you think it should not be legalized, 766-8809. Should prostitution be legalized? Norma Jean Almodovar, let me say that, has worked as a call girl. You are one of the people who thinks it should be legalized. Why?
Because it would eliminate, number one, the excessive amount of police corruption that surrounds prostitution. It would eliminate the vast amount of money that's being spent on harassing adults who want to do with their money what they want to do, and the women who want to do the work. And it would eliminate the crimes that are associated with prostitution.
How do you know about police corruption?
Well, I used to work for the police department. I was with the Los Angeles Police Department for 10 years, and I saw all kinds of police corruption going on because the police that are supposed to be enforcing these laws are men, and they're not made of any different material than anybody else. And they are filled with lust, and when they are in a room with a, quote, loose woman, they have the same kinds of feelings that other men have, and they're prone to use those feelings.
But those people, some people might say, just because there's a certain segment of society, if we believe what you say is true, do this, why should it be legalized across the board? We're going to talk about that this morning and talk to you on Look Who's Talking.
Live from the KCRA studios in Sacramento. This morning on Look Who's Talking, legalizing prostitution, the continuing debate over the legalization of the world's oldest profession. And in the Consultant's Corner, fitness expert Connie Morrisroe with a guide to the proper footwear for aerobic workouts on Look Who's Talking. Now, Jim Finnerty and Sue Pearson.
Good morning and welcome to Look Who's Talking. I'm Jim Finnerty.
And I'm Sue Pearson.
We're talking about the legalization of prostitution, and we're talking with you this morning. It is, as we mentioned, a very controversial subject, and we'd like your opinions.
Very few people have no opinion on this subject, so please let us know what yours is. 443-TALK is our number, and if you're out of the area in Wheatland, Turlock, Modesto, anywhere, just call us collect.
We have a number of guests joining us this morning, as well as a number of people in the audience who have strong feelings about this issue. Let me introduce the three guests. First of all, Tom Wallace is the general manager of Sacramento radio station KFIA. He opposes the legalization of prostitution both on the grounds of Christian values and because he feels it can only lead to a further deterioration of community standards. He also hosts a talk show on KFIA called KFIA Talks. Norma Jean Almodovar is a former traffic officer with the Los Angeles Police Department, turned call girl. She favors the legalization of prostitution. She's also currently awaiting sentencing on a charge of pandering in Los Angeles. In her case, she says she was set up because of her support for prostitutes and her position as a former officer. Next to her, California State Senator Leroy Green has long supported legalizing prostitution in California. An earlier bill by him to do so failed in the legislature. He feels that the time may be right for one to pass now. Why do you think now may be a better time than when you put your bill in earlier?
Don't remember making any such statement. I do not think we have a better opportunity now than in the past because of the nature of the legislative body itself.
Now, let me then clear this up. Why do you think the legislative body now more likely, less likely than it was at your time?
No more likely than it was in my time, for the same reason that I had the problem with it. They said to me, Green, I admire your guts, but I don't think too much of your brains trying to do something like this. Who do you think supports us in our campaigns? We have a lot of women from a lot of churches that are the backbone of our campaign efforts. They'd kill us if we went for anything like this.
Let me go back to your campaign and your bill to support legalizing prostitution. Why did you make the bill?
I did that after a questionnaire that I sent out to my constituency, where the response came 70% in favor of legalization. My secretary didn't like it at all. She said, yeah, that's just the men. So we were able to tell who men and women were because we asked them if they wanted a copy and give us their names. And we just took up a couple hundred that were men, a couple hundred women, got exact same response from both of them, so we felt that it was not sexist, the response itself. And it came about because this was the same period of time when Hair and Calcutta were plays being shown in San Francisco that were showing sex intercourse on stage and the likes. The X-rated movie had come up. There was a matter of wife swapping. You know, these were that era of time when these things came to the fore. And I just wondered whether people felt safer in their beds at night because the prostitutes had been run out of Sacramento one day. Of course, they were back the next day, but the headlines in the paper so read. And thinking about that, I questioned my constituency. They gave their answer, and I went for the bill.
Speaking of response, we have some this morning. Caller on the phone. Line 1. Good morning. You're with us.
Good morning.
Yes.
Hi. Well, my concern is in working with child abuse that the statistics from Parents United, who is the leading sexual abuse treatment program in the United States, has found that 75% of teenage prostitutes were molested as children. And I feel if we were to legalize this, we are going a step further in our society and victimizing the adults who were probably victims as children of molest.
We hear, thank you for the call, we hear very often that prostitution is a victimless crime. And this caller is saying, not so. The women, the young women who become prostitutes were themselves victims at one time. It's a system that perpetuates itself. Tom?
Well, of course, the prostitutes themselves are victims. There's nothing more degrading to a woman than to sell her body. It certainly destroys her self-esteem. And there's also the women who...
How long have you been a woman? Where did you get that notion from?
When did you decide that your self-esteem was lost when you sold your body?
Having never done that, of course.
I've been doing it for 2 years. I gave it away in the police department. Then I felt degraded. Selling it, I don't feel degraded at all.
Another victim of the crime are the wives of the men who participate
How about
in
the wives of the policemen I used to see for
Well,
free?
let's talk about, let's let him answer for just a moment. The wives of the men who participate. Victimless, you don't believe it is?
No, certainly not. It's a degrading occupation. It destroys the self-esteem of the people who are involved. The women who are involved, obviously involved because they have very little self-esteem to begin with.
Let me jump back here. We've got people in the audience. Barbara, can I get just... we've talked about this, and I know you've dealt with issues like this before. Do you support legalization of prostitution?
I don't, Jim, and I would agree with Tom. I think we're talking about one prostitute here this morning who has an opinion of her own. But if you look at statistics collected by police department, collected psychiatrically, that there's no such thing as a victimless crime in this instance. That most prostitutes, many prostitutes are lesbians. It's very debasing to women, and that most of them are in this because they have, let's face it, it's an abnormal desire to be that sort of to have that as a
Would we
vocation.
change that, Barbara, if we legalized it? Would we then bring it out in the open and maybe not attract these elements that you're talking about?
You know, anytime societies have more moral standards for the purpose of a civilized society and maintaining order in a society.
Whose standards
whenever
are we talking
whenever
about?
you get rid of a certain standard, a moral standard in your society, it doesn't bring healing. It brings disintegration.
Let me ask you about Nevada. Nevada has legalized prostitution on a very limited basis. They have set up standards. They have set up brothels. They have set up laws under which, and they look at it as a taxing body situation. Now, some might say that has removed the crime from the streets and has actually helped in some communities.
I have a hard time using Nevada as a statistic because it's not a very densely populated state to begin with. So to take that and use that as a standard for California or any other state, I think I'd have a problem with. If you look at the drug situation, in England in the 1960s, they decided that to get rid of the associated crimes that are with heroin abuse, they would make heroin available to anyone who needed it. And they thought this was a real cure-all for crimes of robbery and murder associated with heroin use. Well, what happened is not only did it not solve the crimes that were already in existence, but it had an effect of escalating heroin abuse and associated crimes.
Let me ask Senator Green, if I might quickly, what would this do to street crime? We see street crime associated with prostitution now. What would legalizing it do?
Well, you know, this is interesting to begin in these kinds of concepts that don't have too much to do with prostitution. That you're talking about all other kinds of issues. You're not talking about prostitution. If you want to talk about street crime, let's talk about street crime and how we get rid of street crime. Here, listen, how does it happen that we consider and always speak of prostitution as being the world's oldest profession?
Apparently, as long as we've recorded history, we've had prostitution, and all these people throughout history have told us it's illegal, it's immoral, maybe it's even fattening. I don't know. But when somebody says it's very degrading, who are you hearing that from? The prostitute?
No.
You're hearing it from some third party who decided for the prostitute, hey, girl, you're degraded. Don't you know that? I'm going to bang you on the head until you understand you're being degraded.
Let me go back to the Nevada situation. That is setting up houses of prostitution whereby you have places for people who want to go to prostitutes to go.
That is exactly what we propose in California.
You don't then have streetwalkers, and you don't have the associated crime which the neighbors think
that
you
is
have.
correct.
Exactly.
What I proposed for California was the licensing of both the prostitute and the premises where prostitution could be, carried out. Also gave counties the right, as they do in Nevada, to determine whether or not they'd allow it within their boundary line.
Are you talking about restricting it to that one area?
That, in any city
After
or any
legitimizing it by law?
Yes, in any city, in any county, just as you restrict where a liquor store is located, you have to have a business license. This is a business. You can't put it in a residential area. Yes, it's restricted, of course.
And how do you suppose that prostitutes who are already operating outside of the law are going to comply with the law?
No, I don't suggest for one moment that they will, because there'll be certain girls out there perhaps that are on drugs, have a drug habit, and you wouldn't license them. And how they're going to get their money, they'll probably still be doing it illegally. But the point about it is the one that is licensed, you have a health check on them, you know where they're located, okay? If something goes wrong and they become diseased because of some customer, okay, you're going to go to the doctor, this and that, you're temporarily suspending license and so on. You have some control that does not exist now.
Well, what you're saying is the state of California wants to go in competition with the street prostitute.
Well, if that's the way you say it, fair enough.
We've got to take a break at this point. Excuse me for interrupting. Remember those thoughts. We want to hear them all. Is there a compromise in this? Is there something called decriminalization, and what is that? We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Look Who's Talking. Glad you could join us. We're talking about the legalization of prostitution this morning, and we want your opinion on a Vodafone poll that we're conducting this morning. If you think prostitution should be legalized, you can call yes 766-8820. If you do not think it should be legalized, 766-8809. Vodafone polls, and we'll have some results for you at the end of the hour. Let me get you to stand for just a moment, because your opinion in this is what?
Well, I'm for decriminalization, but not for legalization.
What's the difference? What are we talking about in terms of difference?
Well, legalization means that prostitution would be restricted to a place like the Mustang Ranch, where working conditions are very poor. The women are not allowed to be free agents and open their own business. I consider that a monopoly, not a free enterprise. And I was wondering why Norma Jean, who's facing sentences, and I think you're wonderful, would be for legalization rather than...
I'm for decriminalization.
Let's clarify it then. You are for...
I'm for decriminalization rather than legalization, because there are a lot of people who do not believe what I do is moral, and that is their right to believe it is immoral. So I don't want the government to sanction what I do any more than the government should sanction their morals. And decriminalization would give me the opportunity to be able to run the business, and it is a business, without sanctioning
What would it do specifically to decriminalize?
It would take away the laws that are in force against me rather than make new laws in favor of me.
There would be no one looking to arrest you on pandering charges.
Since it is a business, it would be regulated the same way other business, restaurants, whatever. It would have to be that way because it is a business.
But you disagree, Senator Green.
Yes, I do. I disagree because there is a third-party interest involved, that a man and woman have a physical contact. Perhaps there is a venereal disease transmitted in either direction, okay? I want legalization so I can demand health checks, so I can say that this person cannot act in the role of a prostitute for this limited period of time.
You want a third party in there policing.
Well, I want,
yes, no?
I want the policing in there to protect the third-party interest, as you protect other kinds of interests by the state, where, you know, you do things of this kind to see to it that the public at large is protected.
I see.
If I go to a prostitute and somebody made her, transmitted a sexual disease to her, she transmitted to me, I transmitted to a third and fourth party, and so on, I do want some security from the state. Because in addition, when you talk about these associated crimes, I now say to the prostitute, look, prostitution is legalized. You have the legal right to that, but
If you're fooling around with rolling drunks or popping pills and so on and so forth, those are still illegal acts. And let me tell you something. I'm going to remove your license from you and perhaps slap you in jail.
Who's going to do that? Police department, health department? Who would you have be the...
There will be a mix of the two. The health department will do the health things. The police department will do the other things, as they currently do in such matters.
We've got a caller on the line. Line 2, are you in favor of legalizing prostitution?
I sure am, and one of the points that I'd just like to make is that Norma and I have a lot of respect for you to be able to even come out in front to people and make a point of view, which is nowadays is hard for people to do. They hide behind the cross or radio stations, and to me it isn't any different than prostitution, isn't any different than somebody going on a radio and be becoming an evangelist. That to me isn't a prostitute in a sense. So I don't know. It's all irrelevant. It's just a matter of the fact that somebody, because they don't believe in something, because of a religious belief, has nothing to do with carrying it on to somebody else.
But doesn't the community have a right to set its own standards of moral behavior?
You bet they do.
Let me get the caller's opinion. You talked about morals.
Isn't that the case? So I'm part of the community, so isn't that the same thing as like saying that you are too and so am I, so why can't I have prostitution legalized?
But if you have the minority voice in your community, then who prevails?
Usually the religious and groups.
If they're the majority, then what's wrong with that if that's the prevailing community view?
Because that's an invasion of church and state.
Probably get worse because of the...
Now, why should you have a situation like this? Anybody that belongs to a given church, and that church has certain teachings, and you following the concepts of that church, then by all means follow them. And if that dictates to you that prostitution is immoral and sinful, then by all means have nothing to do with it.
What about community standards, though?
What happens?
Let's go back to community standards.
Community standards, well, whose standards and what community? Are we talking about San Francisco now and its community standards?
But a statewide vote to decriminalize, could local communities have the vote to say, no, we don't want it here?
That depends on how the measure is put on the ballot. You can't put it on the ballot to say that any community that wants to decriminalize it can do so. I don't think you're going to do anything like that, but you could. If you decriminalize, the reason why Norma and I disagree in this area, okay, for me, on my side of this, the reason why I object, if you simply decriminalize, that means that you take all the laws on the book in this subject area and you wipe them out. So there's nothing there, okay? But I do feel a need for some control. I do feel for a need to protect these third parties who don't agree. It says, I don't want it.
Well, what you're both talking about, either with decriminalization or legalization of prostitution, you're opening Pandora's box. The heterosexual prostitution is not the only prostitution we have already in our community. We're talking about homosexual prostitution, bestiality. We're talking about prostitution with children,
for their sex? That's
the
not
pedophiles seeking children for prostitution purposes, and
That's
you're legitimizing the whole thing.
No,
Well,
you're
you would not legitimize any
No,
of
you're not.
You would not legitimize any of that. It would occur just the
No,
same.
you're not.
No.
When you're talking about decriminalizing prostitution, it does not change any of the laws about child abuse and sex with underage people. We are not in favor of having underage people in the business whatsoever.
What's the age?
At whatever age a person becomes an adult, at that age, when they can choose what other career they would choose, that's the age they should be able to choose if they want to do
Let me jump over here. David has a comment.
Where does the moral degeneracy stop? That's my question.
If you're worried about morality, I've got a question for you.
Well,
A police department. Okay, but let me ask you about morality. Would you rather have a woman in the community who accepts money for sex, which will happen anyway and does happen, or would you rather have a clean police department that doesn't accept money for looking the other way, which happens all the time?
You keep throwing
That's
stones.
immoral.
You keep throwing stones at the police department.
Yes,
and maybe
because I saw that
if we
happen.
accept it in your case, are you saying that every police department across the country has the same kind of standards as the one you worked under?
I'm saying that they frequently have that sort of standard because it's very easy for them to look the other way for a few $1,000s extra a month.
Let me leave the police aside for just a moment. Go back to community standards.
Wait,
I want to know if you're going to let him speak or you're going to let her keep
We'll do both.
You know, what I'd like to find out is, how much you know about history, because in every country, in every nation that has went to this moral degeneracy that you're talking about with prostitution and the child sex and child prostitution and the bestiality and the homosexuality, those countries have crumbled and fallen. Now, let me quote you a couple of quotes that are not Bible so that you can, see that I'm not thumping at you. And one of those is from Peter Marshall, The choices you make in moral and religious questions determine the way America will go. And General Douglas MacArthur, history fails to record a single precedent in which nations subject to moral decay have not passed into political and economic decline. And you can go on right down through it, and you look at Rome, and you look at the Greeks, and you look at the Babylonian Empire, and they fell because that they had legitimized prostitution, they had legitimized child
Can you
sex,
tell me what
and
country
these
there's
types of
in
things.
ancient history that
And
has not fallen?
I hope you
Will
get
you
thrown
just
out on your ear
describe
the next time around.
Just describe to me some country that hasn't fallen. What country do you have in mind? What country do you have in mind?
You're saying the country's heading your direction? You just watch how this election goes. We're going to throw the liberals like you out on your ear.
That's right. You're going to do that, but it's, please God.
Religion.
Listen,
You
God,
see, separation of church and state. I should
hold
have
on one
the
second.
right to
Senator,
do
you're
with
talking
my
about
body
countries.
what I
Look,
want.
you know what's very interesting about this? Here's a girl walking down the street. She's carrying a sign. It's only got 3 words on it. It says, sex for sale. She's soliciting. She gets arrested. The next day, she's out there on the street again carrying a sign. It's got 3 words on it. Sex for free. The cop goes on his way looking for prostitutes because she's not one. Now, what is it then is prostitution? Prostitution apparently is the presence of money when sex is involved. It has nothing to do with sex, it has something to do with money. So apparently the state has decided that there's something evil about money in the presence of sex.
We talk. Let me take a quick break right here. We're going to take a quick break, come back, talk some more with you at 443-TALK. Much more to come on Look Who's Talking. We'll be right back.
So glad you're back with us. As you can tell, very few people are on the fence over the issue we're discussing this morning, legalizing prostitution. Strong feelings on both sides. I want to take a couple of quick phone calls and find out about those feelings. Line 3, good morning. How do you feel about legalizing prostitution?
Yes, good morning. I am in the military. I've been overseas in Europe, and virtually all the countries there in Europe, prostitution is legal. Let's take Germany, for instance. In Germany, prostitution is legal, and I kind of would like to make a point about morals there. The Germans, there's no way that anyone can tell me that the Germans are more liberal than the Americans right now, and prostitution's been legal there for many years. Another point I'd like to make is I think Norma Jean, I really respect her for being up there and showing her face and telling her views, and I'd even like to have her phone number. Thank you very much.
I don't think we can provide that, but thank you for your opinion. Let me take another caller. Line 4, good morning. How do you feel about legalizing prostitution?
Well, I'm definitely against legalizing it. I think that, saying that it's going to cut down on the crime and the would-be rapists, their services are certainly not free. They're not going to let men use their bodies for nothing. And if they don't have the resources to pay for their services, you're going to turn the crimes around into a different nature.
How so?
Well, if they don't have the money to pay for their services, they're going to go out and do something like robbery and breaking and entering to get goods for resale. All sorts of things.
But what's the difference between that and leaving it illegal and having it anyway? I don't understand.
Well,
how does legalizing it change those things that this caller is talking about?
Well, aren't you talking about some change? I mean, if we have crime...
she is saying that if you legalized it, these things would happen.
And if we already have that, as you just
said,
I'm
saying that,
why should we change anything?
Why should we change it? Because we'd like to get rid of some of those things.
Yes.
If one girl, was not raped because some oversexed maniac, went to a prostitute instead of knocking some girl on the head.
Senator Green, I think it's been well documented that rape has nothing whatsoever to do with sexual desire.
I think
I said one. And if you are going to make these generalized statements that therefore, and the audience approves of, that everybody is in the given category, you're wrong. There is always exceptions, And I said if one girl is not raped because she's not under that pressure even to give in, let alone rape, It's just one. That's worth it to me. Because when all the people that oppose what third parties are doing. They're not satisfied with saying it's not for me. I guess my problem is that I guess I'm the other side of the coin that David is on over there. David wants to get rid of all the liberals and so on because we're ruining the country. And his problem, I guess, is the same as mine, and that is we're so convinced that we're right that it makes everybody else appear to be wrong. We don't seem to be willing to simply take our ideas and put them out there on the table for the public at large to decide on. That's what I'm willing to do. I don't govern people. I represent them. I'm not a governor of anybody. I'm a representative.
But
And
if you
you're
represent
something,
you're,
Senator Green, I
you're
think-
saying the legislature is not ready at the moment to even attack this particular problem, even
That's
to
a
address this.
personal opinion of mine, yeah.
Okay, Victor has come.
Yes, I have a question for the gentleman who opposes prostitution. Did we learn anything 60 years ago from Prohibition? Would he bring it back and all the crime and corruption that goes with that? You cannot legislate morality. It's impossible.
Tom?
Well, I think Senator Green is overlooking something that we really ought to take into consideration. What legitimizing the prostitution is going to do is going to add to the problem. It is going to bring more people into the business, if you want to call it that.
If they want
It
to
is
come
going to,
into the
it's going to make it
business, should that
easier
not
to
be their
do. It's
choice?
going to mean a lot of competition for you.
Fine, there's 10, at least
more
10
people
clients
involved
for
at
every
lower
one
prices.
I don't think
I tell
so.
you, you're
Sex
really
is already
opening up a big
available for
box.
free. A man can go and have a woman somewhere else for free, but he's still willing to come to me and pay $200
Listen, for
an
free
hour.
is not the same incentive that for money is when you're talking about the kind of dough that
Well,
you've
is that
got
what
to
you're
get.
talking about? You're trying to protect the price of prostitution?
No, I'm not trying.
That's what the
No,
police
I'm not trying to
department
protect
does.
the price of prostitution. I'm merely saying that what you will do is proliferate the problem. You will add more
You're
incentive for
afraid
more
that every
people to get
secretary is
involved
going to
in it.
leave her job because my job looks better because it's $200 an hour and her
You think
job
they
is
wouldn't?
$2 an hour?
You think they wouldn't work on the
If
side?
that was their choice,
if it was
why shouldn't
legitimized?
they?
Let me
If
take a
that is
question.
their
Let me take
choice.
a comment from Dolores.
There are several things here that I would like to comment on, and I know that I cannot use up all the time. But one thing, a couple of things I want to say, but this is the most important thing. I do not think that a woman that would sell her body could say that she does not have a low self-esteem of herself, mainly because my body is priceless. There is a $200 an hour, $500 an hour, $750,000 an hour. I cannot put a dollar sign on my body. My body is priceless. Another thing is that it should not be sex for sale. It should not be sex for free. It should be sex for love. That is the one missing element out of prostitution. It is not sex for love. It is sex for sale, sex for free. It's many things. You look at it as work. You look at it as a business. And it is, I'm sure that even with your mom and your dad, they did not do a business. It was because they loved one another, and out of that came you.
Let me come back to community standards for just a minute, if I might. Tom, if indeed there were a mechanism set up whereby individual communities, local community standards, could decide whether or not they wanted decriminalized or legalized, how would that sit with you?
I don't think decriminalization or legalization, either one, is a solution to any problem. I think it's just going to make more problems, either way.
Sure, but you talk about community standards. You talk about deterioration of community standards. And if indeed we have people who say, in our community, we want this sort of thing, what's wrong with that?
If indeed in our community they say, we want this sort of thing, that's an entirely different ballgame than what we have. We have every community where prostitution is present, demonstrated right here in Sacramento. They don't want it. They don't want any part of it. They want it out of their community. You're talking about a what if that just isn't possible.
I want to come back to community standards. You had a comment.
Is that why $42 million is made in Sacramento? Where the prostitutes...
But wait, when you're claiming prostitutes, the business of prostitution, $42 million?
Yes, there was a $42 million claimed by the city of Sacramento that was made by prostitutes last year.
Don't you think that that figure is a bit outlandish? Does that sound unreasonable to you?
No.
No?
Well, how do they come up with the figures when it's illegal, and how
That
would
is
we
the
know?
gross? Is that what you're talking about? That's what prostitutes take? How much income tax was paid on that?
Pardon? No.
If it were legalized, they could pay income tax just like everybody else.
But
and
you don't-
just imagine how
Sure,
much
the
more
federal
tax.
government could get into business too.
Norma Jean. If it were
decriminalized, the same thing. I pay taxes, okay. And number one, I want to address this woman's...
You
yes,
pay
I do.
taxes on your
Yes, I
income
pay
from prostitution?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
How do you list that in the IRS?
I list it as I am a prostitute, as a business, yes.
And does the
The
IRS...
government doesn't care where your money comes. Yes.
Fine, but does the government then turn those records over
No, they don't.
to the local authorities?
No, they
IRS
don't.
records are
The IRS are confidential, but I'd like to address
Except
the
for the
lady's
state.
issue about love and sex. First of all, I agree. Sex with love is wonderful. I have a boyfriend with whom I've been living for 9 years. I love him very much, and our sex life is wonderful. Okay. Now,
when you talk about feeling degraded, perhaps you do, and that's nice, that's your problem. However, when I am with my clients and they are paying me $200 an hour, what I do with them is I make them feel wonderful. Sex is a nurturing, positive, giving, caring experience, okay? And when I give this to my clients, this is what they are receiving, and that is what I'm selling.
You're not giving it.
Yes, no, that's right. I'm not giving it, I'm selling it. But they know that when they come to me, and they're willing to pay that price anyway, and they take it, and then they go away.
And their wives?
When I was giving it away to the cops for free, what about their wives? Do you want to eliminate sex altogether other than in marriage?
Let me take a quick break. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to talk about Vodafone results. We'll talk some more with you. More to come on Look Who's Talking. Legalization of prostitution.
Unconstitutional, sir.
We've been talking about the legalization of prostitution this morning, and in the past about 35 minutes, we've asked you to call in on the Vodafone. Well, the Vodafone has been busy, and we've handled as many calls as it can take. Just so you know right now where the callers are going, let us give you the results we have so far. Supporting the legalization of prostitution, 253 yes, that is 53% on a yes. No, 221, 46% no. Senator Green, this differs a little bit, and granted, this is a random sample. This is not any kind of poll that is scientifically correct. It's just a random sample of some of our viewers on Look Who's Talking. If you took your poll today, how do you think these figures would reflect in that?
Oh, I think that my poll would still come out about the same. I did it twice. I did it in 1971. I did it again in 1979. Got the same figures those times. I'd like to make this comment. Personally, I am opposed to prostitution, personally. But I'm far more opposed to the state playing any role such as it plays now of saying that it's illegal. I say I, as one individual man, I could give you all kinds of reasons, without ever quoting the Bible, why I think it's bad for a woman to become a prostitute. But it's her choice to make, not mine. As a representative people, I represent all the people in my district, as do my colleagues. And I say, on behalf of my constituency, this is what I think we ought to do for our people. You don't agree with me? Hey, the ballot's yours.
Norma, we have just a couple of minutes left. Your feelings on what steps should be taken. Now, if Senator Green's bill has been defeated and there are no plans to introduce any new legislation, what would you do to change things?
Well, I think that a lot of people need to get out and sign petitions about the way they feel and get the laws off the books and let women, adults, decide what they want to do with their body and with their money.
I might ask you the same question, Tom.
Well, I think this business of the woman's choice is a silly argument.
You don't think women should have a choice?
The oldest profession is not prostitution anyway, it's murder. And that was a choice that was made by one man for another man.
A profession?
No, I don't think so.
Isn't murder a profession?
That's why the state stepped in. That's why the state stepped in and said, you know, what is legal and what is not, which you don't want us to do in this case.
Well, as a matter of fact, I don't want you to change what the state has already said. The state has already said it's illegal, Senator Green.
Which state?
You know that. Huh?
Yes, but you do want that interference. Now, you apparently feel that there's some connection between murder that you're talking. I don't know how they got in the conversation.
They got in the conversation because we were talking about a crime that's committed, and you're calling it just a woman's choice.
Well, a few minutes ago we heard that we heard that all the nations in the world that collapsed did it because of prostitution. I would like to know what nation of the world that was lived in ancient history has uncollapsed. Who's still around? Tell me about somebody.
Well, you're not arguing that point with me, are you? I didn't make the
Tom, if we all agree that there are some problems now associated with prostitution, what would you do about those problems? And you certainly wouldn't legalize prostitution, as we've heard. What would you do about those problems?
About stamping out prostitution? I don't think it can be stamped out. I just don't think we ought to encourage it any more than we already have. The only thing we can do that we're not doing now is enforce the laws more vigorously. And that's a very difficult problem.
This is an issue which has been debated a long time. We have unfortunately run out of time. We want to thank you all for joining us this morning to talk about a very, as we said, controversial issue in community standards. And thank our viewers as well for calling in with their opinions on our Vodafone poll. Thank you.
Well, okay, as much as you guys
guys know, I guess, I don't know if it got back here, but the Hollywood cops were deeply involved in a burglary ring. They were the burglary ring. They would take orders for, particularly for video equipment, they would take orders from the fellow officers, captains, commanders, etc. for a particular brand or model of video equipment, and then at night they would go in their black and white, fly the video equipment place, throw a rock through the window, the alarm would go off, they would drive in their police car, go in, load up the back of the police car with video equipment, call the alarm company, and write a burglary report that they burglarized. And so this was going on for quite some time, and it went way up. And when Jack Myers and Ron Venegas, who were the two cops that got caught doing it, because the insurance company got a little suspicious when it was just video equipment and always happened at night, and it was like a whole pattern. And they did their own investigation, and they found it was the cops, and so they went to Internal Affairs, although I don't know why, because Internal Affairs does as many bad things as everybody else. But I guess they figured they got to start somewhere. So the Internal Affairs did an investigation, and they caught Ron and Jack doing it, and so they were arrested, and of course, since these two guys were not the only ones involved, they wanted to know who else was involved. And Jack Myers was going to testify against the other people. In turn, he would be not charged with quite as much, whatever they charged him with. So the day that he was supposed to give out the names of the other cops that were involved, his car was run off the road, and he went into a coma and he died. Now, they said that was just a coincidence. He fell asleep at the wheel. Okay. 2 weeks later, Sandra Bowers, who was a street prostitute, who was also a key witness in these burglaries, and also she was a key witness in the sex scandals that were going on concurrently with the burglary. And the cops would go up to these hot tub parties that were in Hollywood Hills, where the prostitutes had, clients, and they would have sex with the girls on duty. They'd park the police car outside and go in and get laid. And Sandra was one of the key witnesses, and she was found stabbed to death in a motel room 2 weeks after Jack was killed. But they said that it was one of her crazy clients that did it to her. And so it was all these things that were going on. The cops were having sex with underage explorer girls, and there were so many things. I would see the cops take drugs when they stop a car for speeding or something. If the guy or the girl had drugs in there, they just give them a ticket for speeding and take the drugs, and the person was real happy, not that, hey, okay, I don't have any drugs in here, and they wouldn't say anything about it, and the cops would take it and take it to their own parties. As I'm sure you know, in New York, Eddie Egan from the French Connection, he's a very good friend of mine, and if people are truly so naive to believe that a cop is so above the rest of us that when he seizes $40 million worth of drugs, that the street value he has to pay absolutely nothing for, and that there is nobody that checks on them to see that the stuff that they destroy, if they destroy it, is truly the stuff that they confiscated. Well, Santa Claus is coming next week too. It just does not happen, and I wish it did. I wish that cops were above things like that, but they're not, and that we should force them into roles and to enforce our morality, because we're not grown up enough or whatever to not take drugs or whatever. We just can't do that to these cops. It corrupts them, and it puts them in a position where, hey, they have nothing against sex, they have nothing against drugs, perhaps, and so when they see all this stuff and $40 million, that's a lot of money in their salary.
If the number of prostitutes, or whatever you want to call them, would increase, or in your opinion, would the number increase?
I don't think it would. I don't think there'd be any more or any less prostitutes in the business than that already go into it every year. I think that just like people who, alcohol is legal, and I don't think any more or less people drink because it's legal. I don't drink. It's legal. I could drink if I wanted to. I just chose not to. I don't take drugs, although that's illegal. But people who want to do those things will do them, whether there's a law against them or not.
If I might respond to that,
I couldn't find any real statistics on prostitution, but on the related topic of drugs, the decriminalization of marijuana in Alaska, for example, which was put through.
You can be put in prison for whatever your years are because of one count of handling. So, okay, I'll go on. The courts aren't going to look at that and think that's kind of weird.
Well, I'll tell you something. When this arrest first happened, I was told by one of my clients who's politically connected where I could go to get my case, where I could go to pay off the district attorney to get my case dropped. So if you say if the courts are going to look at it, I don't know. The
problem is when you start talking about decriminalizing prostitution is you're not ignoring the problem of the kids. And we are a society that sells young sex. And if prostitution is legalized for adults, it's going to focus right back on the kids, and it's not going to protect the kids.
You're not...
No, I don't agree. I don't agree. Because the law is still that you cannot have sex with an underage person, and there is a law.
Nobody follows
I know, but you follow the law in prostitution. And the thing is that throwing these kids in jail is not going to help, and throwing the adult prostitutes in jail doesn't help either. I mean, it gives them a prison record, and what it does, these laws give the cops power to extort the prostitute for information. They extort money and sex out of her, and in San Diego, we've had a young lady that was killed after she told, she told on the cop that was extorted. She was a street prostitute. He extorted money and sex out of her. She turned him in. She got him fired, and her body was found. She made a tape and gave it to the attorney.
That's one individual case.
32 of these have been killed in Seattle alone.
Yes, they have.
32 by the Green River Killer, the young
putting them in
teenage
jail
girl.
does not change
I'm not
that
saying putting them in jail, but I'm saying if you make it
Wait,
legal.
hold on. One at a time. Go ahead.
If you make it legal, any kind of sex like that legal, prostitution, that means that you agree that people should be objectified, just objects, that these kids are only objects and orifices
I
to those
agree
guys
that
who
I
put them
have
down
the
there.
right to do with
You're
my
just
body.
an object and an orifice
I
to
don't
those
care.
guys
It's
who pick you up.
my choice to be
Well,
an
I do
object.
care, because
It
I
is
care
my
about how
choice.
people see these
But
kids.
You're
just
making
letting
that
them be
choice.
an object.
You're making that choice for everybody, and I don't think you have the right in the United States of America. I have the choice to make for my own body, and you shouldn't be able to make laws that say you can't.
for 13 and 14
No, of course not.
But you're doing
the
it
law
for
is
society.
already.
You want to decriminalize
society
for all
hasn't
of
got.
society. You're saying all society should decriminalize it, aren't you?
Absolutely. For adult
Then you're saying
prostitutes.
you're condoning society objectifying kids as orifices.
No, I'm not.
Yes, you are.
No, I am not.
You are.
It has nothing to do with children.
You can go
it has
have
to
sex
do
with
with
all
an
these
adult
guys you want and get
prostitute.
paid as much as you
But
want, but
I
don't
go to
do it
jail.
Don't lay your trip on her.
But don't lay yours on me and
I
send
don't
me
want
to
you to go to jail.
But that's what the law
I don't care if you go to jail.
But the law sends me to jail.
Hold on
and
just a
has
second.
no
I have
right.
one other guest I want to introduce here who may or may not want to jump into this. This is Jude. These are bad kids. These are promiscuous kids. It's really truly not understanding the nature of the problem in society and the families that really sends the kids onto the
The
street.
kids are the victims, and at least as far as that goes, I certainly agree with the point of view that the people who belong in jails are the pimps and the johns, not the kids who are the victims of
Except
this.
that they don't put the pimps and johns in jail.
That's a problem, and
that's
that
the
needs to
problem.
be dealt with.
And what the law needs to do is, instead of punishing people who voluntarily go into prostitution, it should deal with coerciveness. And if there is a pimp who is coercing a person into prostitution, absolutely. But that has to do with coercion and not with prostitution.
All right, let's raise the question. Let's forget for a while the concept of the young person, the minor, the boy or the girl going into prostitution. Let's talk about adults. Why should an act between two people that involves sex, that involves exchange of money for sex, be illegal? Why should that be illegal? I mean, we pay people to get a massage, to cut our hair. We pay people to come into the house and clean the apartment. We pay people to cook for us. Why should sex be separate as a service?
I don't think you can separate the pieces. I don't think you can separate out and say that's not going to affect kids, and that's not going to...
You can't say it's not going to affect society.
How can you
putting
say...
the society stamp of sanction.
No. Society can't sanction anything. Society is only a group of people out there, and they have no business looking in my bedroom and sanctioning anything that I do.
The heroin addict who shoots up in his veins. Why should we stop him?
Right. That's his life, and unfortunately, he's not a
Can I
very
ask
good
you to do
choice.
this freeze segment? I asked for a freeze. Why don't you pick back up on the point you were making, Norma?
Okay, well, she just said you can't control it or confine it. Why are you then arresting the women and putting them in jail? Because the guys don't get arrested. The cops use the laws for extortion,
but
and
you're talking
the
about
amount...
corrupt cops. If the cops
Yes, I
weren't
know.
to deal with that problem.
But they don't deal with that problem because if the girl goes and tells on the cop, then what happens to her is she gets
I think the Johns ought to be arrested, and I think the pimps ought to be arrested. That's what they got to be arrested.
Anyone who coerces
let me
somebody
come back
should be
to, let me
arrested.
come back to the situation. In other words, you think that the exchange of money for sexual services should be really illegal.
Bill, they arrest the guys who buy drugs, don't they? They arrest the buyer and the seller,
What's the
right?
equation between the drug and the sex?
There is-
drugs can end
They're
up killing.
illegal, that's all. I'm about telling you. Both things are
you're
illegal
following
right
by
now
what
under
the law-
the
what the
statute.
law
Yes,
unfortunately.
Prostitution ends up killing, too. I've seen too many kids who have been too scarred and too hurt to not feel emotional
But
about
putting
that.
those kids in jail does not solve the problem.
I'm
And as
not
long as
supporting
there's a
putting the
law
kids in
against-
jail.
Well, then why are you supporting putting an adult prostitute who has chosen this profession in jail? She chose to do that work.
I'm saying the society as a whole can't sanction.
Society doesn't have any business sanctioning or not sanctioning, and that's what decriminalization would do. No, not in the in a socialist country, yes, but in the United States of America, where the freedom of the individual comes over society's
Every
wishes,
law.
then yes. The individual
One point
has
on
the
the end
right
from
to
our
say that.
professor, and then we've got to go to a film clip.
These laws that have criminalized prostitution did not always exist. They were put into motion in the early 20th century, and the effect of that was, in fact, to disperse women across throughout the city to increase the number of pimps, because precisely women depend on pimps when prostitution is illegal, when they have to pay off the police, when they have no other support systems, and when they've been cut out of a neighborhood and community context. So the effect, some of the detrimental aspects...
Why? Has it met with success, or has it led to even more problems?
Well, I studied the 19th century where prostitution was legalized in the sense of the state inspection of brothels and state and police regulation. And my research shows that prostitutes who were brought under this system, first of all, remained in prostitution much longer. They were stigmatized. They were cut off from their working class neighborhoods. These kinds of systems always call into motion a system of police brutality and corruption that the police and the state then becomes the...
And they had a murder for hire ring. They were doing all kinds of wonderful things. The police were doing these things, and I said, this is supposed to be a moral job? Am I crazy? What am I doing here? You know, this is 10 years of my life.
All right, but Norma, just because there are other wicked people in the world does not give you license to go and be wicked.
Well, I don't think prostitution is wicked, because what I do with my clients when I was working, I make them feel good. And they pay me, and I don't do anything that I couldn't do for no money that I do for money. In other words, I have an act of sex with them which is perfectly legal, and they pay me. They can give me money. So the only thing that's illegal is soliciting.
Is the act of sex legal in prostitution? I didn't know that.
The act of sex is legal. You can have sex with anyone you want to. You just can't take money for it. That's all.
This is an interesting show. Every day I come here and somebody tells me something else, and I go,
Aside from the morality, doesn't AIDS scare you?
Yeah.
Okay, actually, no.
Girl.
When I was on the police department, I had a number of sexual relations with cops, and I didn't know anything about safe sex or anything else. But as a prostitute, I became very involved in safe sex practices and teaching other people safe sex practices. And I would have to say that my chances are less of getting AIDS now than they were when I was having sex with the cops.
Norma, why were you having sex with the cops?
Oh, that's a good question. They weren't very good in bed. Most cops thought that making love was like using their gun, that all they had to do was take aim and shoot.
Why don't I just... let me tell you what I do when I'm in trouble. I go to the audience and let them ask the questions. I sit around till I catch a grip on things that I'm thinking about. Is having sex in Los Angeles Police Department with the boy police and the girl police part of what it's all about? She says naively, or...
Well, I would say that sexual encounters on the job are normal for any job.
Yeah.
But I just decided that, I don't mind being a sex object. I mind the sexual harassment. I don't mind being a sex object, but I do for somebody else's benefit and not my own. And as a prostitute, I am a sex object for my own benefit. That money goes to me, and it's not for somebody else's benefit.
What do you think?
I think she's highly wrong, and it upsets me that she would sit up there and make excuses for her own actions. She became a policewoman because she wanted to be a policewoman. She wanted to have sex with her co-workers. That was a decision she made. Now, if she wanted to trade off time off for sexual acts with her commanders or her sergeants or whatever, that was a decision she makes. And as far as corruption, that goes in any job title, whether it's a board of education, whether it's some high corporate, whether it's the government, there's corruption and all. And for her to use that as an excuse for her to become a prostitute and to make it public, I think it's poppycock.
What does the police department say about this?
Well, they don't like me because of what I'm saying about the police department. But
Well, I
don't
can't
use it as an
imagine why.
excuse. I became a prostitute by choice. I chose to become one. I enjoy the work. I enjoy the money. I enjoy the hours. There's nothing I don't enjoy about it except having people who feel differently than I do have the police point a gun at my head and take away my freedom by putting me in jail. And that is what I think is wrong. No, there wasn't a time.
Okay, wait. Got to get to the microphone here.
Well, I think that I have worked with a lot of young women in hospital, and I see a lot of them come in after such acts, and they end up with hysterectomies and a lot of things that are detrimental to their health. And
You're talking about wear and tear on the body.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, a lot of young people should know about it and to not get into that style of life.
The only thing that I advocate is that people do with their lives what they want as long as they don't hurt anyone else. If they choose to become a prostitute, that is their business. Don't take away their freedom at the point of a gun just because you have something morally against it.
You seem very comfortable with your lifestyle. I mean,
Yes,
you know,
I
you're
am.
on
I know
television
who I
and
am
everything.
what I want, sure.
How would you feel if if you had a daughter and she decided to do that?
If that was what she chose, if she was old enough to do so, that would be her business. I would not. The only thing that I would disown her is if she became a cop. Actually not, I'm just kidding, but that's really how I feel about the police
Let me tell you,
department.
we did call the Los Angeles Police Department. What happened? They wouldn't return the call. I mean, did we tell them what we were calling about? Yeah. Oh, yeah. They still didn't return the call. Well, when you say safe sex, if you're a prostitute, why aren't you going to get... What is this safe sex bit?
Well, first of all, most prostitutes use condoms. In many states, there are laws against women carrying condoms, which is kind of foolish because it defeats the whole purpose of safe sex practices. But they are, if they carry condoms on them, that is proof that they are a prostitute. But
This show is getting away from me. I don't even think you can say condoms on the air. Would you let me check now that I'm in the middle of the show? Terry, what do I do? Go to a break? You sit down, all right, and I go find out about whether I'm allowed to say condoms. We'll be right back. All right, now, let me just... You were standing up. That's when we figured this thing out.
Okay, I'd like to know if she has a boyfriend or a fiance or somebody
that she
husband. Cares about a lot and what he thinks of this. How does he handle this with you?
Okay, well, I had been dating a man for 10 years, and we got married. In fact, it'll be our 10th anniversary, February the 14th, and we got married November 19th, just the day before I went to prison. So we've been married for over a year.
But does he know
And
your
he
form
knows,
of, your form of employment? If he doesn't, he's watching the show.
Right. Then I'm in a lot of trouble.
You were arrested for pandering.
Right.
And I got to tell you something. I don't know what that is. I honestly don't know what
pandering is a felony, and all it means is to simply encourage a person to commit an act of prostitution. That is the whole entire law. And all you have to do to break that law is if you are a single person and you've got a friend coming into town and you want him to, you want to be fixed up, that, and the person that fixes up the date is pandering. But very few people get arrested under the law. It has a mandatory prison term of 3 to 8 years on the first offense with no prior convictions, and there is no mandatory sentence for rape or robbery or assault. What there is to encourage a person to commit prostitution.
If you are pandering, you can get you get a mandatory sentence, but if you rape somebody, you don't.
That's right.
Oh, dear. Every once in a while. Oh, dear. Oh, dear. You want to tell me the story of the pandering, or tell both of us the story of the pandering?
Sure. Well, let him ask his question first.
Sure.
Okay, a lot of the issues on this show are controversial, like this issue itself, but...
You noticed.
Okay, but I almost made me forget my question.
I was just goofing on you. I'm
okay,
sorry.
okay. But the thing where the lady was saying, you know, is it dangerous, you know, I mean, or is it, you know, like she's distributing, you know, sexual diseases or whatever. The federal government is, you know, like, you know, selling cigarettes and everybody doing everything that's harmful to themselves anyway, you know. So it's up to the person, actually.
That's right.
Like this lady, you know, if that's what she wants to do. Now, I'm not saying that I agree with prostitution either, but I'm saying if that's what that lady wants to do, you know, it's her life, let her take her own risk and everything involved. You know, we don't really have any say-so about it. The people that want to go to her and buy sex, then, you know, that's up to them also.
What do you charge? I mean, are you doing well? I didn't mean what do you charge? I'm sorry.
When I worked, because I'm on probation now for a felony, I was charging from $200 an hour up. One evening, I made $10,000, and that was just to sit and have conversation with a man. I didn't even take my clothes off. I talked to him all night.
Some guy paid you $10,000 to have conversation?
Just to talk to him.
And I talk on the air all the time?
Some say talk is cheap, but in this case it wasn't.
What did he want to talk about?
Everything. He was lonely, and he wanted me to stay. You know, what happened is he was supposed to pay a basic certain amount of money, and then the longer the evening got, the more he wanted to pay, so I would stay there. Finally, by 6 o'clock in the morning, I said, that's it, I can't talk to you anymore, I better go home. And it ended up, I had $10,000. But, you know, we just talked about his family and his life and everything else.
He never thought of psychiatry, did he? Were they?
Well, a lot of men see prostitutes for that very reason, is because they want someone to talk to.
I understand
Sex
that they
is
do
a
that,
very small part of prostitution as a call girl. On street prostitution, it's a different issue, but as a call girl, most of it is companionship.
And very little of it is sex?
Very little of it is sex.
Did you have your hand up?
You don't have a pimp. I mean, there's a difference between being a call girl and a...
absolutely.
She can get $10,000 for an evening of conversation. What is she going to play an agent for? Did you ever had a pimp?
No. Call girls don't work for pimps, and basically there's only like 15% of all prostitutes who have a pimp. The rest of them are independent and work for themselves. You start out as a call girl working for a madam, but she's like an agent in several, you know, you can work for several madams at a time.
You know this is illegal.
Yes, I know. I'm trying to decriminalize prostitution because I think women ought to have a choice to do with their own bodies as they will.
Well, but do with your own bodies as you will is one issue, and prostitution is another issue.
It's the same issue. As far as I'm concerned, either it's my body, and I can sell it if I want to, or it's not. If it's the government's body, let's stop kidding ourselves and saying this is not a free country.
What did you make as a policewoman?
$18,000 a year.
So I assume you're doing better this...
Well, when I was working, right now I cannot work. I cannot apply my trade, so I'm not working. I'm not making very much money.
Do you have kids, or do you want
No,
kids?
I don't. I have 13 brothers and sisters. And
Do you want kids
No,
at
I
all?
don't.
Okay. Let's ask you about the pandering. How did you get caught in an act of pandering?
Okay, well, I was writing a book about the police department and all the corruption and things like that, and the police found out about it in 1982, and they tried to get a search warrant. When they were unsuccessful, a year later, I was working with a woman who was still on the police department, who was a good friend of mine, and this woman is a 50-year-old, 6'2", 230-pound woman who told me she fantasized about being a call girl, and it is a very common fantasy. You know, unlike what a lot of people will tell you, it is a common fantasy. And knowing that this woman could not fulfill the fantasy, the way she looked, it wasn't just her age and her height and weight and everything, she just didn't look that good. And so I went out and phoned her a client, and I paid him to see her, and I called her up, and I was very excited. And she was wired, and the police were using her to set me up, and they came in and confiscated my manuscript. And because I called her up, and she said, well, what do I have to do? I said, nothing you haven't done in a normal adult relationship. And she said, is there money involved? I said, yes, there is. And that was the felony that I committed. And so I went to trial. I was convicted on 1 count of pandering. And the judge sent me to state prison for 50 days to be studied to see if I'm dangerous to the community. In the meantime, while I'm going through, there was a woman there that was in for her 6th count of, she robbed stores and forged checks and something else, and she was in and out in 10 days. And I thought, something is really radically wrong with the system that says what I do as a voluntary adult with other people who do it voluntarily, and I didn't try to force this woman into this. This is something she fantasized about.
How bad was it in prison?
It was horrible. I was in solitary in isolation the entire time, and it was really bad.
Let's take a break. We'll be right back, and it's your turn. Prison. they kept you in solitary because you were a police officer, right?
I was a traffic officer. I was not a police
Yes.
officer. And that's what makes
But what
a lot
did
of
they
cops
do?
mad.
You were telling us that they double handcuffed you and things
Right.
like that. Why? Is that common practice or what?
Well,
What do
only
you-
because I was in as a high security risk, I would say, and that's why they, I think they did it out of psychological warfare. I mean, they did a lot of things to me that are not standard practice, as I know.
Such as what? We didn't hear you. We weren't on
Well, the double handcuff, they double handcuffed me to myself and to two guards, and then they strip searched me every time I went out of my cell to take a shower. I don't know what they were looking for, maybe a client that was left over or something, I don't know.
Since you weren't brought there on drugs, what are they strip searching to look for weapons? Or?
I don't know, but I mean, if I'm in the cell and I'm in there in isolation, there's no way for me to get a weapon, so to strip search me every day is ridiculous.
I'd like to know why you married.
Why I married? So that my husband could come visit me in prison. And they wouldn't let him anyway, so it was kind of useless to get married.
Okay, you're married, and
Right.
you have sex with your husband, and also then you have sex with these other men.
Right.
How can you determine the difference for love? You say you married him to come and
Right.
visit you in
No,
prison.
I love him very much. I'm very much in love with him. But, see, I don't view marriage as a lot of people do. I think that it's licensed by the state, and since I don't believe in state licensing for adult relationships, I don't think the state has any business licensing my private relationship.
In other words, your husband can't satisfy you, you have to
No,
have
he
more
does
men?
satisfy me. No, I work when I was working as a prostitute, I did it because I enjoyed the nurturing aspect of helping another person, another human being. When I was with a client, I would talk to him, I would massage his back, I would listen to him. And this to me was healing to my own pain and my anger when I left the police department. I think prostitution is a lot like the restaurant industry. And if I were a chef, you could understand that I could sit there and cook all day long and not eat all the food that I cook, but I would still enjoy the cooking. And I feel the same way about working as a prostitute.
Wait a minute. Let me ask you something. How many of you are in favor? You're in favor of legalizing?
No, decriminalization.
You're not in favor of legalizing it?
Decriminalization, legalization and decriminalization, the difference is legalization would make new laws that allow the state to become the pimp and run prostitution. Decriminalization would take away the existing prohibition against prostitution and allow it to become a business and be governed by business laws rather than the state.
Let me find out how many of you are in favor, by applause, for decriminalizing prostitution. That's a surprising response. I am very surprised at that. Okay, who had their hand up? I was walking somewhere.
Wondering how long she spent in prison.
I was there for 50 days, from the day before Thanksgiving to January 8th of last year.
Huh. I'm just curious, are you ever afraid? I mean, I would be terrified. Aren't you ever afraid of getting beat up or knifed or...
I was beat up on the police department. Actually, I was attacked. So I was more afraid of being attacked on the police department than I am as a call girl. And the reason
Who were you attacked by? Sorry.
I was attacked by a businessman when I was towing away his car at nighttime. And
So you're really not afraid when you walk into a room with a strange person?
Most of the men that I saw were not strange men. They were all men that were known by the madam that I worked for, and she knew these men. These men had been seeing prostitutes for many, many years, and there's the same men over and over again, so there was no fear of this being a strange person.
You pay income tax?
Yes, I do.
As a prostitute?
As a prostitute, I sure do.
Wait a minute, you mean you put down...
It is not illegal to be a prostitute, it is only illegal to solicit.
So on your income tax, you put down prostitute?
Yes.
How do you like that when they get that at the IRS?
They don't
My goodness. Yeah. What do your old buddies on the force think? Or do you have any old buddies
Yes,
on the
I
force?
do, actually. There's some cops that are there that are still, my friends. They think that they say, go for it, Norma Jean. Tell people what it's like, get something changed, because they can't. And to be quite honest with you, if I become a secretary or a doll maker, and as you'll see later, I make dolls, cop to doll maker, who cares? Will I ever get out there in public? Will people ever listen to me? And perhaps not a lot of people will credit me as a prostitute, but at least you'll hear what's going on, and at least I have done my part and tell you what's happening. And if you don't change it, then it's your problem, not mine anymore.
You said you enjoy nurturing, but you don't want to be a mother, or you never wanted to be a mother. Do you
I don't like changing diapers.
Well, I was going to say, do you think part of that is because you grew up with, what did you say, 13
Yes,
brothers and
there's
sisters?
14 of us
You had
altogether.
enough
Right.
nurturing when you were a child.
I
Maybe?
think I lacked some nurturing just because there was so many of us, but I just don't want the child part of the motherhood.
Tell me, when you said if you tell us about it, we can make changes, are we talking only of the L.A. Police Department?
I'm talking about, well, number one, the
Give me some, let's hear it. What would you say to me if I invited you on as a doll maker? Tell me changes that what's wrong with the police department?
I would still say that, first of all, the victimless crime laws are what's causing all of the corruption, and not just the LAPD, but as you know, I'm sure Miami. And as much as people might be opposed to the use of drugs, I'm opposed to the use of cigarettes. I don't smoke, drink, or take drugs. But as an adult, these should be your choice. And if you are opposed to these things, you should help people become educated as to their harm, rather than take a gun to their head and send them to prison.
But the police don't make the laws.
No, but what happens is because of those laws, the police are humans. They drink, smoke, and take drugs. And so they think these laws are pretty silly. And as long as there's so much money to be made, and they're making $18, $25, whatever, $1,000 a year, if they can make a little bit extra under the table for looking the other way or not being in a place at the right time.
Are you saying most police people take payoffs? I'm asking you to say
I would say they,
you're not.
Now, most of them no, but I'd say that the ones...
All right, so it's not all the police who are doing those things, but there are certain ones along the way. And that's your opinion, right? It's not the
my opinion
necessarily of us or the show. I'm going to learn to get us off the hook. Let me tell you what Norma Jean is doing now. She's making dolls. She is indeed the lady who was a traffic cop, and then she was a prostitute, and now she is a doll maker. And that's our show, and thank you for being with us.
Well, this is what I want to say. I want to say, welcome to Alive and Well.